only in Kansas would that be accepted. My hometown, the colors that I grew up with are like the University of Southern California. 10 miles away, our rival is all purple. So I grew up my whole life not being very associated with loving the color purple. And so I'm sorry if your school has purple, that's okay. Or K-State fans here, you would enjoy a sermon titled The Power of Purple. Or you could maybe think it was a cleaning solvent that I was talking about this morning. I don't know. But I know that if you would turn to Acts chapter 16, I want to share with you that when I would grow up, we would go to Tulsa to a lot of places to watch ball games with our coaches. We'd have field trips or school outings. And one of the places we went to was to the Mabee Center at Oral Roberts University all the time. And I always remember what was written in their basketball court. Some of you might know that if you've ever been there. You've been there to watch NCAA regionals or whatever that they have there. But in their basketball court, they have written, "Expect a miracle." And I always thought that that was interesting, that when you come here, expect something awesome to happen when you play here or when you watch sporting events here. And I always thought that captured me. And you'll see a little bit of that in our text this morning in Acts, because that's the attitude the Apostle Paul might have had as they were on this trip in Acts chapter 16, verse 11 and following. From Troas we put out to sea and sailed straight for Samothrace, and there on the next day to Neapolis. And from there we traveled to Philippi, a Roman colony and the leading city of that district of Macedonia. We stayed there several days. On the Sabbath we went outside the city gate to the river, where we expected to find a place of prayer. We sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there, and one of those listening was a woman whose name was Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth from the city of Thyatira, who was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message, and when she and the members of her household were baptized, she invited us to her home. "If you consider me a believer in the Lord," she said, "come and stay at my house," and she persuaded us. She was a dealer of fine purple. You know, it's interesting that this was a color that you see a lot in biblical times, and the things that we have today we take for granted, but the things that they had came at a price. To have something special, to have something colored, and that color was in demand in their era. She was a lady that dealt in that. I don't know. I know she was a businesswoman, and she might have been a seamstress that went along with it with clothing. But one of the things that you also noticed, in their day and time, people had to go outside the city gates at these particular areas to be able to worship. It's interesting that when these men arrived, they must have known where to look for these places to take place. So we went out and looked for a place where Christians were meeting together. Wouldn't it be neat that when someone would come to Fredonia, or someone would come to the community where you would live, that when they would come to visit from somewhere else, that would automatically say, "Hey, let's go out and find some other people to worship with this morning, because I know I have high expectations that when we go out there, we're going to find some of them." Well, you can find people worshiping this morning, but maybe not as Christians studying the Bible. You might find them doing things at other places, but would your expectations be high enough to think, "Oh, I know we'll find a group of believers that we can sit down and pray with and enjoy their fellowship this morning"? And they had those expectations as they went there. And sure enough, God didn't let them down. It's interesting that what it says in the text, that not only she was a dealer in purple cloth, but she was a worshiper of God. She had a love for God in her heart. May have been her Jewish background. I don't know. You know, it says in Proverbs 9:10, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." Maybe it came from her family. Maybe Lydia loved God because her mother did. You know, I've always believed, some people will say, "I became a Christian because of this one catalytic event in my life. I'm not so sure I really believe that for me personally. I believe that there are a lot of seeds planted in a person's life, and there might be one catalytic event that brings all of them together, and then they start to grow. And I think that was true for me. Just like my grandmother driving down the road was one of those seeds that was planted every week in my life, but it wasn't growing until later in my life. But it was there. And I think that you never know. You think, well, I made the choice to come here today. Well, maybe you didn't. Maybe your great-grandmother was praying for your family, and at some point in time in your life, those seeds matured and they came to fruition in your life. And so as God answers the prayers of your great-grandmother, you're in church today because of her prayers. It's interesting that when we get to heaven someday, how God is somehow going to reveal to us all these things, and we're like, wow, I thought I made the choice to go to church today. I guess it wasn't my choice. God was answering my great-grandmother's prayers. When I went to Bible college, I got a note from a lady who was the organist in my home church growing up. She was a history teacher at her high school. She sends me a card and she said, you might know this, but I'm really proud that you're at Bible college. Ever since you were a little boy, I prayed for you that you might become a Christian someday. And she said, I'm really proud that you're going on to be a minister. I thought it was my choice. Now the history teacher was praying for me. You know, maybe I'm here because God answered her prayers. You know what I'm saying? And so Lydia may have been a worshiper of God because of a lot of things that happened in her life. And these things are important for us. They're valuable for us. These things need to exist. You might think it's a small thing that you got up and came to church today. But that little seed might be planted in somebody in your community or in someone in your family, and it might be one of those wonderful things that grows someday into their life. You will never know what causes them to be a worshiper of God. When I was a youth minister in Wichita, I had a boy that would never come to church. He would never attend church. No matter what we did, we could never get him to come to church. And he was a nice guy, a really good athlete. His sister came to everything that we did. After high school graduation, he decided to go camping with us in the mountains. He went forward at a church service we had. He enrolled in Bible college. He went to 4 years of Bible college, went to seminary. Today he's a Bible college professor. People ask me, you know what? I don't have an answer for you. I don't know what seeds came to fruition in his life that all of a sudden out of nowhere, they bloomed, they blossomed and grew, and wow, look what happened. So you might think little things that you do by someone seeing you read the Bible at work, or someone see you love God in a certain way at some aspect of your life, you never know what seed that it plants in the heart of someone else, and that someday God might just run wild with that. Because it still is amazing how we become worshipers of God. I think that I can explain it to people, but probably in my ignorance I'm not even getting close. God's going to show with me someday how awesome, how it all came together. She listened, which is interesting. When you're a public speaker, here's one of the interesting things you learn. You're all looking at one individual here, one sorry-looking individual. I'm looking at all of you, and I can pretty much tell what some people are thinking. Usually when they're sound asleep, or, you know, I preached at one church, and the floor angled in this old church, and so the pews go up in the air, and so the people in the 3/4 of the way back are about as high as that exit sign. And this one lady, she would sit on the inside row every Sunday, right in front of my pulpit, just about the time I preach. So my whole sermon, I'm looking right at her asleep People would go, man, you were screaming and yelling today. Well, I was trying to wake her up. You know, I didn't know if anything could get her attention. You know, how motivating is that? You know, and you can tell when someone's listening. I also had a great speaker come to visit a church one time, an author, a Christian writer. And after church, he said, I want to know who that man is that sits right back there. And they said, what do you want to know who he is? He said, I'm telling you what, I've never had a man listen to a sermon that I preached like that man back there. And it was one of the most godly men in our church. We explained to him who it was. Lydia was one of those kind of people. She wasn't just in the crowd. She wasn't just hanging out. She wasn't just being there falling asleep. She was listening intently to what was being said. There was something that captivated her and what was sharing from the Apostle Paul. And so often God, wow, he's trying to get our attention. We're so busy. American people, I think, are some of the finest people in the world. And I believe that some of the finest people in America live in the heartland of America. And I really believe this. I mean, you're from the East or West Coast. I'm sorry, and I don't try to be offensive, but I think the people that are going to save America live in the heartland of America. That's just my personal opinion. But you know what? As good as we are, we're a very busy people. We're so busy that if your family's like mine, the only time I see my family is at weddings and funerals. And I drive home sometimes bawling with tears in my eyes because my nieces and nephews and my cousins don't even know who I am. Because I only see them about every 8 or 10 years. And you know, they grow a lot in those time periods. We're so busy in America that we don't take time to work on the things that really, really matter. If you own a company here today, I'll speak to you as the CEO of a company. Shame on you for not letting people out to go to funerals. Funerals of friends, not just their immediate family. If we can't take the time to go and mourn with the people that we love, then we're too busy. Because that's what builds America. That's what makes it a great country. We're so busy in life. She took time to listen. Not be so busy with her business to the things that he was saying. And it says that she opened her heart to what was being said. What was Paul talking about? What was he sharing about? What were they teaching about? You would have been bored in the early church because you know what the message was every time that you heard these men? You know, today ministers, we preach 50 some times a year and we try to be very creative at the things that we talk about and the things that we preach about. And so we're constantly reading and studying and sharing to find some way to wow that lady that's sleeping in the back of the church so that she would wake up. In the early church, they hit and moved. They hit and moved. They were like boxers. They punched and bobbed it, because they went in, they preached the gospel, and they moved. People became Christians and they moved. And the church was constantly moving. It wasn't stagnant like the church today. And what they were talking about in that constant movement was the gospel of Jesus Christ. Say, oh yeah, I believe in the gospel. Well, what is the gospel? Well, it's the life and the teachings of Jesus Christ. Everything that you know about Jesus Christ, that was the gospel. I mean, the virgin birth, you can look at the power of the crucifixion. You can look at the ascension. You can look at the resurrection. You look at the promise of the second coming. You can look at all of his teachings and all of his miracles and all the sermons and all the lessons. And remember, what you have in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is a summary. So they probably talked about things that you've never even heard of before. Because all we have is a summary of what he did. And they would tell people about this Jesus, who he was, and you know what? They had as much difficulty with it as you do. And if you think you don't have difficulty with what we believe, sit down tomorrow at breakfast with one of your friends and describe to them how the virgin birth works. And when you get done with that, go out to junior church and explain to those kids how the virgin birth worked. I've never been able to do it, and I've been a minister 40 years. If someone says, Mike, how does the virgin birth work? You know what? I really don't have an answer for you, except I have faith in God, and I believe in God, and I trust in God that He's going to let me down, and so I believe. But can I explain it to you? No. And so when they would talk to people in audiences, people would say the same thing. Well, now, Paul, now hold on a second. You mean to tell us? Yes. And the Christian life is a life of faith. In believing what I cannot see, believing in what I cannot explain, and trusting God with my life that He will take care of me if I will believe in these things that I cannot explain. I know that Jesus is coming back again, and I've put my life in God's hands, but I don't know when. I don't know what day. If you're in my classes that I teach, whether Sunday school or Wednesday night, you will know that I would guess it's going to be on New Year's Eve, right at midnight. It says at a time that you would never expect, at a day that you would never expect Him, at a time when the whole world is thinking about what would be a better time. Ooh, that's not the crystal ball, that's Jesus. And I'm not sober. But I believe in the second coming, even though I don't know when it's going to happen. But I'm supposed to prepare my life for those moments, for something that I still can't explain. That's difficult for some people to understand. Lydia was a person who, she listened to that. She responded to it. You see, here's the thing. I've always believed that if somehow I could get you to understand how great God's love is that Mike was talking about in his meditation, if you could really understand who Jesus was, and someone could do a better job of it than I do, and you could come to the understanding of how great this Jesus was, I really believe if someone could really explain it, I don't understand how anybody could walk away and not want to live for Him. Because I believe with all my heart, if Jesus was here today and He spoke to you, every one of you are going forward. Because you're going, man, it's Jesus. I went to this church and He was there. And you know what? It's my job to try to do that to the best of I can every week. Every Sunday school teacher, every youth sponsor, every elder, every deacon, every person that's a volunteer worker, we're supposed to be about trying to let people see Jesus so that He can respond to that. Lydia saw it. She listened. It made sense to her. I want to respond to this. I want to give my life to this gospel that you're talking about. If this is what God wants us to do, then I want to do what God wants us to do, and that's what was in my heart when I came forward at church. That's what was in your heart when you came forward and made a decision. And so she responded. But not only in the text did she respond, if you notice, that wasn't good enough just for her. She wanted to go tell somebody about it. Isn't it interesting that in most of the stories in the gospel, when you talk about Jesus and He did something amazing, it wasn't enough for someone just to recognize it. They wanted to go and tell their friends. That's how we are, isn't it? Do you have people in your family that can keep secrets? Shannon, does anybody in your family keep secrets? Who's the worst one? Who do you not tell if you have a secret? Your brother? Ryan? Ryan, you can't keep... We don't ever tell Junior. My father-in-law will start out every conversation saying, I know I'm not supposed to tell you this. You've heard it, haven't you, Greg? We know what's coming, something we're not supposed to know. In biblical times, it was okay to let everybody know, to tell them what Jesus had done, to spread the news of what? The gospel. To tell people what a great guy he is, the things that he had done for us, to reveal it to others so that they could change their life. And so, people would say to Lydia, what have you done? I've done this, I want to follow God. Why are you doing this? She explained to them what Paul and the apostles has explained to her, and guess what? Her whole household got baptized. Her whole household gave their lives to Jesus Christ because she was excited about what she had learned. I've heard a lot of people say if Christians were more excited about the God that they believe in, maybe I might want to be one too. But sometimes we can work with people and not even know if they love the Lord or not. And that should never be true. We ought to know the people around us if they love the Lord or not by what we see and hear. And then she did a Mother Marcia. Mother Marcia is sitting right down here. I know that this is a different kind of church. You've probably already figured that out. And one of the things we pride ourselves in is good food. And then sometimes we pride ourselves in just dropping by on people. And I do this on purpose to Marcia because she's got like this magical porch at her house. And I miss my grandparents. And my grandma had a porch like that. You know, one of those porches where you can go sit on a night like last night when it was so pretty. And you can sit out there and just kind of, there's a healing power in it. I don't know how that you can be healed by sitting on a porch, just sitting there doing nothing, looking at the wildlife and looking at the weather, and that when you go to bed and wake up the next day, you're like, wow, why do I feel so much better? You know? And Marcia's got one of those kind of porches. She's got one of those porches where you can pull up and say, are you Marcia? Mr. Hughes said I'm supposed to pull in here and you're a really good cook. And that we could eat supper here tonight. And you know, Marcia is like, come on in. There's another drive-by here. I don't know how many times that I've been out there and you're, yeah, we're busy. Got some homemade cinnamon rolls coming right out of the oven. Getting ready to put icing on them. You know, maybe we could stay. It says that Lydia was like that. In the power of the purple of her life, she had a way with people that, well, you know, we're busy. Well, you know what? I got some fried squash and some fried zucchini, and I got piled up, and I got some salt and pepper, and we can just sit there and eat it all night till we just die. That's the kind of evenings I've spent at Marcia's house, sitting on the porch. Why is it the next day you feel so good? Because there's a healing power. Lydia had that ability to, look at the last verse. She persuaded them. You know how she persuaded them? Because she had them cinnamon rolls. You boys are busy preaching the gospel. I bet you're not too busy to come in here for this and spend a little time at our house. There's a lot of people in our world, man, they need to be healed. They need the soothing healing that comes from sitting on a porch like that. I'm glad that I grew up in the country because I got to enjoy those things, and I never even knew how special they were because I thought everybody got to grow up like that. Not until I got older did I see that that's not true. And there's certain places in life that we all need to go visit sometimes. We need to slow our life down. We need to understand the fellowship of Christian people and the peace that it brings. I mean, some of our families, my family included, along with yours, there needs to be some healing in it. There needs to be some peace in it. If it doesn't change, some of our families are going to be on an episode of Jerry Springer someday. I mean, there needs to be some peace that comes into it and calms it down. And you know what? Only God can do that in the right way. He can bring such a wonderful feeling into your life if you'll just let Him. This morning, as we get ready to wind this down, I want to share with you a passage of Scripture from Proverbs chapter 6. As the praise team heads this way, listen to these verses. In Proverbs 6:20, "My son, keep your father's commands, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Bind them on your heart forever. Fasten them around your neck. When you walk, they will guide you. When you sleep, they will watch over you. And when you awake, they will speak to you." There's a lot of things. If your mom was like my mom had x-ray vision. Did your mom have x-ray vision? Now, Rick, you can't answer that because your mom, you better be careful. She's down the road. I could be somewhere doing something that I wasn't supposed to be doing, and I could feel a force. And I would somehow look through an audience, through all the people, and I would see these evil red eyes focused on the back of my head like, oh man. And they were, and then sign language went along with it. You know, it's like, yeah, or it was the little, you know, like the other one is the whip, you know, with the finger like this, the flip. You're not paying it, and then just right in the temple area. You counselors are going, Mike, that is abuse today. You can't do that. I mean, the serious flip. What was that all about? Pay attention. You know, we're in a public place. But you know what? Those things didn't deter me a moment from thinking my grandmas and my mom, greatest people on the planet. Owe them. But you know, something greater is to listen to their teachings that come from God. Because to have a godly person lead us in the ways of the Bible, wow, that just gets better. And if we would just listen to the gospel, let it change our lives. God's trying to get through to us so that we would live for Him. This morning, if you want God to come into your life or your family and change it, why don't you let Him as we stand and as we sing.